No kid's Jewish education should end at 13. Adraba offers Ontario high school credits infused with Jewish learning online for teens across the province. Ministry approved, intellectually demanding, Jewishly transformative. Adraba.ca. That's ADRABA.ca. Your teen belongs here.
There's a lawyer in Chicago named Stephen Derschlag. He has the largest collection of Haggadot. Not largest collection of Haggadot in private hands. He has the largest collection of Haggadot in the world.
But do the page numbers match up, though? Like
What's
when
that?
he's going around the table, don't they have
Oh, my God, the page numbers.
Don't the page numbers need to match up? We're all on page 2 for Hisham.
That's great. I love it. Something tells me that 98% of the Haggadot in his collection you cannot touch for the Seder.
What good are they?
Jewish institutions are in financial straits. Does that give them the right to sell rare books and artifacts? We get into the pros and cons of that. And with Purim right around the corner, we figured it would be a great time to discuss the role of clothing in the rabbinate. I'm Avi Feingold, and along with Yedida Eisenstat and Matthew Leibel, we are not in heaven. Hi, friends.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hey. I don't know how we're going to top our last week's Shabbat table shenanigans, Shatnez shenanigans.
I was scolded. I was scolded sort of by my family for for bringing them into the pod like I used to in my radio days.
I got nothing other than at our Shabbat table this week, we had somebody who had just won a National Jewish Book Award and not her first. So that was like a super sense of like confidence and not false modesty of like being able to be like, yeah, whatever, it's not my first. And so we got to make Kiddush on champagne with a whole group of people. So that was kind of nice and fun.
That feels fancy. That feels like a very fancy dinner.
Remind me the title. She goes by Chachama Professor. What's
no, I think Darshanit, I believe.
Darshanit,
Miriam
my bad.
Udell. Darshanit, Miriam Udell.
Well, how would you guys translate Darshanit? Like a drasher?
Sermoner. Sermonist.
Sermonizer.
Sermonizer.
Female drasher?
I like that.
A female who gives drashes.
Yeah, that she like expounds the
I love it
Torah.
too. I'm the most famous person in my family's Shabbat table, and no one ever toasts any champagne to me, nor would they appreciate me saying that. So,
well, if you if you won something significant, maybe they would.
What do you mean? I win things all the time. The love and admiration of the people at Simkin Center, kisses from my children. My Friday Night Lights actually is an award-winning. I'm going to San Francisco next month to accept an Igniter Award from AJAS, which is like the American Jewish, it's all the nursing homes, the Jewish nursing homes from across the continent. So yes, I do have some acclaim.
We should toast you as well.
I'll take champagne anytime. Yeah.
Great.
Yedida, what's in your world these days?
So many weeks ago, I convinced my daughter that she and I should read The Phantom Tollbooth together. I don't know. We found a copy in shul and we brought it home. So anybody in shul, if you're looking for your copy of The Phantom Tollbooth that did not have your name in it, that had been sitting in the lost and found for many, many weeks, I have it. Anyway, I remember reading it as a kid, maybe on my own. Maybe I was like 8 or 9 years old, but it is genius. So yeah, just this, bored kid in his imagination in the afternoon, like a box shows up and it's a toll booth and it takes him initially into the land of expectations. And from there he goes into the doldrums, and from there he goes to Dictionopolis. And there's this like whole debate thread in the book about like whether words are more important, or if you're from Digitopolis, then numbers are more important. Anyway, it's just genius and everybody should go read it again. There's my book recommendation.
There's a TV show I love called New Girl, where there's an exchange in the show. One character says, something you should know about me, I love the Phantom Tollbooth. Another character says, of course you do. You're a human being.
It's brilliant.
But Yedida, you are going to talk to us about our first major topic today, which is about books and about a library which is near and dear to your heart. Yedida, can you tell us about what's going on at the JTS library and why we should care about it?
I have like a few preamble pieces just to say that like I have nothing but appreciation and hakarat hatov for the Jewish Theological Seminary. And like, I do not want this to turn into, nor will it turn into like a, let's just dump all over JTS for the next half an hour.
I hope not.
No, but like I mean, as we get into this, we're going to use this current event to, get into some bigger issues about cultural heritage and preservation and like who the treasures of the Jewish people belong to and what it means to like be the steward of them. I'm going to go back about 150 years, but I'm going to do it really quickly. So just bear with me. The Jewish Theological Seminary in Breslau was founded in the 19th century because Jews in Germany entered the universities and they started studying history and taking all those critical historical skills and turning them on Jewish studies and on Jewish texts. And in the early 20th century, this comes to New York and the Jewish Theological Seminary is founded. Solomon Schechter was one of, if not the first chancellor and leader of the institution. And he brings over a brilliant librarian and bibliophile named Alexander Marx, who spends the next 50 years building the world's best collection of rare books and Jewish manuscripts that were housed at the seminary. And so also the other thing that's happening in the early 20th century is that Nazism is on the rise, and Marx really arranges, he like goes over to Europe and he brings these manuscripts and these books back from Europe, really saving them from the fires of the Holocaust. And so the library and this collection was really the jewel in the crown of the Jewish Theological Seminary, with this understanding that Jewish scholarship requires access to these texts and these treasures, and that the institution was going to be the place for safekeeping of these treasures. So recently, a close friend of mine, David Sklar, published an article in Tablet magazine called The Great Manuscript Sell-Off. And David's article talks about how in the wake of various financial crises over the last 10 or 15 years, JTS has sold pieces of its collection. Initially, it said that it sold pieces that were not central, right? Like Latin texts that were valuable and useful to teach with, but were not part of the core collection because they were not Jewish and they were not in Hebrew. As the seminary, for a million different reasons, is facing these financial difficulties, it has come out more over the years that there were other pieces that were sold as well in private sales. This has come out more and more because those pieces are changing hands. And so they're showing up in auction catalogs for sale, and people are scratching their heads and saying, hey, wasn't this part of the JTS collection? So this is upsetting to people who are connected to the library and know more of the history of the library.
What's wrong with selling a collection or selling parts of a collection?
So libraries are supposed to be about democratization of knowledge and accessibility. Anybody is supposed to be able to come into a library and gain access to knowledge. As a student at the seminary, sort of knowing that I'm part of this tradition, right? Like Judaism is all about the transmission of the tradition, and knowing that I'm part of this transmission of knowledge and part of this scholarship, and that any day I could go upstairs to the library and engage with and smell and feel and wash my hands and then touch like these amazing treasures that are hundreds and hundreds of years old, that like an autographed copy of Yedida Nefesh, right? The poem that we start Kabbalat Shabbat with every Friday night. That's amazing. A printing of the Talmud that was printed in Warsaw as World War II was starting, right? Like every single one of these books has an incredible story.
Right. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Obviously, you're an academic, and this is your
This
life.
is my stuff.
What is your reasonable expectation about? Or no, but I'll back up. Why do they have to sell it? Like I don't think anyone's going to argue that they tell a story and there's great treasures, and of course, I don't think that's the question. My question is, why did they have to sell them? They need the money.
Yeah, they need the money. And there's competing priorities, right? Like there's always competing priorities in any institution, and also any institution that has a budgetary shortfall. So, one thing that's happening is the philanthropic priorities of American Jews have changed. All the surveys show that liberal movements are atrophying dues paying members. And so the seminary and Hebrew Union College also are having a very tough time just keeping the lights on. And it's really a shame. HUC in Cincinnati is facing similar difficulties. They have an enormous amount of property, and the Cloud Library and the American Jewish Archives, and nobody goes to rabbinical school there anymore, but they have this campus they can't sell and they can't move.
You take a step back and you're not an academic, you're a little bit more removed, like a me, or even more so. And I think you're going to say, well, how often were these particular manuscripts checked out? How much are they worth? How, isn't it more important to have the library open, if that's what it's coming to, than preserving the one or two books that they could get away with maybe? I mean, I'm involved with a few other things like a sports hall of fame and museum, and we do de-accession, I think is what it's called. We do accession artifacts for different reasons: damage, usefulness, space, right? Like you run out of space because your collection grows when you bring things in. So it's not I know for a fact that it's not unheard of in this world to take things out of a collection, right? Now, in the article that you guys referenced, the David Sklar, the thing that caught me was more about the fact that they did it in a very clandestine, secretive way, like they had something to hide, like they were ashamed and they didn't want to be public about it. But my question is still kind of there. Isn't it better to save 1 million books by selling one or two, if you could identify one or two that, dare I say, won't be missed as much? They'll always find someone who will miss it. But
right. I think it's about, do these pieces, these heritage objects, belong in private collections once they've been handed over to an institution that is charged with making them accessible to everybody? I think that's one piece. And another piece is, yes, I think that, you're putting your finger on exactly one of the things that David wanted to highlight, that because these were private sales, we will never know what sum they fetched or what sum they could have fetched, right? If they'd been listed by an auction house, presumably more people might have taken an interest and the seminary could have made more money, right? There was some clandestine, shadowy, we're not going to publicize that we're doing this and hope nobody notices. It seems, right? I'm adding in that part.
I've heard that as well.
Is troubling.
I've heard that as well, yeah.
But let me start by playing devil's advocate here. So first of all, libraries evolve over time, as all institutions do. And so when you talk about deaccessioning, Matthew, libraries shift their focus over time. And especially nowadays when a lot of studies are done with digital files instead of the actual manuscripts themselves. The manuscripts themselves are important because they tell a story, but for scholars doing the actual research on the words themselves, the digital files are probably even better because you can manipulate them and you can handle them in a way that you don't have to be as precious about than with the actual artifact itself. The artifacts themselves are sometimes better kept in private hands than in public libraries because there are only a couple of people being able to handle it. The person has a financial stake in wanting to preserve this properly, and therefore they will invest in the proper handling and storage of these artifacts.
One hope.
And the person if you've paid that much, one would hope. And so there's a lot of reasons why one could see that there's a lot of valid reasons for why you should sell things just in general, right? For not even for the financial strain, for whatever reason, you can say, look, to me, the biggest issue here.
But then say that.
I know. So I'm saying the transparency is at the core of all of this, right? If a library goes and says, the institution that we're part of isn't making a lot of money anymore. We're facing huge financial issues. We're sitting on a treasure trove, literally of, millions of dollars worth of stuff. And this is part of the discussion now, we want to open this up and say, hey, we can sell these 5 things, which we will miss terribly for the stories that they tell, but we won't miss any of the research opportunities. Or we could move out of Morningside Heights in New York, which is a very, very valuable piece of real estate, and we'll move to a nice suburb elsewhere, and that'll save us the money also. And go and talk to the board of directors and help make that part of the decision, make that public.
So notably, the Jewish Theological Seminary Library is looking for a new director right now, Avi. So maybe you should throw your...
Are you telling me to apply because of this vast library that is behind me?
Yes. I'll say, just to go back a minute, I will readily admit that I did all of my research and have since done basically all of my research, not with the actual objects, but I have benefited enormously from digitized manuscripts. And yes, right, like you can turn up the resolution and you can blow them up really big and they don't close on you and you don't need to use book weights and all of that is great. But there's something about, right, and David gets to this in his article a little bit, right? Like you can't see how small the object is or what the penmanship, right? Like it doesn't have the same flavor, right? Like the object itself as a material historical object tells you more than its digitized images. So the manuscript that I have spent most of my time thinking about over, I don't know, like the last 20 or so years is, I argue, the best and most original and closest we will ever get to text of Rashi's Torah commentary. It's called Leipzig 1, and it lives in a library in Leipzig. And the graduate school of the Jewish Theological Seminary was generous enough to buy me a digital copy many years ago so that I could use this manuscript. You all can now go see it. It's available transcribed with the text of Rashi's Torah commentary on alhatorah.org. But there are wormholes in the parchment. And so those wormholes, though, were there when the scribe copied the text.
Not the physics sci-fi wormholes, actual holes where worms ate through the books.
Eaten by worms in the parchment. And so the scribe has to write around them, right? So that tells me also like about the community, right? Commissioning a manuscript is very expensive. And the materials were really expensive as well. So like these are things that you notice when you're holding something in your hand.
There is a market for rare books nowadays, and I want to shift to that because if not for this rare book market, and specifically, like Genazim is one of the big ones that has started recently. Kestenbaum has been around for decades. These are people that are specifically auction houses of Judaica. Geffen is one that is in Israel. They just this week auctioned off a first printed edition of the Guide for the Perplexed. What do we make of this market in private, like this private market of people collecting specifically Judaica? I mean, there's always been, for hundreds of years, there's been an antiquarian book market, but this has sprung up and exploded, so to speak, in the past 10 years in the Jewish world. What do we make of this?
Rich people do funny things with their money. That's what I make of it. They buy art, they buy swords, they buy funny-looking eggs, and they buy rare books. Like, it only really appeals to goofy rich people or people like Yedida who truly love these books, right? And to be fair, like I have a CD collection and a CD player, and I get the idea of something tactile versus something digital. I'm not totally cynical on that, but...
And Avi has a baseball bat signed by Charles Bronfman.
Which he told us about last week, right? So, like, I get the value and the sentimental attachment and everything with these things. I just think that at play for me, you've both touched on it, it's the bigger question about big organizations in general and their direction, their leadership, their decision-making, how transparent they are. That one is interesting to me. And just another example of just more evolution, more like you talk, Avi, about the digitization of these things and you like how it makes it easier to do your job. I never want to lose what the old teaches us. I don't think any of us wants to lose that. But progress going forward, like I'll never be against that if that is what it is, right?
But I don't think it's about progress, and I don't think that like progress progresses without an understanding of the past and where we came from.
I agree with that.
As much as I think it's weird, and it's like these weird luxury items that the Haredi community, because it is, the article about Genazim specifically was talking about how it's similar to like the commodification of religion in general and in the religious community, where if cars don't mean a lot to you and, all sorts of fancy other like, 6 and 7 figure art doesn't mean anything to you, well, then you go and you spend money on religious things like having bigger chumras. And that's a different discussion. But in this specific case, the idea that like the religious community is showing off their wealth by buying religious items, it's kind of like weird to me in a very good way, but also in a very bad way. But like that generates excitement. That makes people want to care about rare books more than they had before when they were just sitting in dusty libraries. I know the stories of people that I knew that were very, very religious that would go to, the JTS library because they had tons of Sfarim that they wanted to see that nobody else had. Yeah. And they were willing to cross the lines, so to speak, and be able to do the research there. And yeah, so honestly, the fact that those stories are being told because there's an explosion in the book buying market, I think is really great for the fact that these stories are going to be told more in the communities these days. Okay, let's move on to our next topic, which is also about material culture, but about more current material culture, I guess we could say. So, do you guys know what a fit check is?
I'm old. Tell me.
You've taught me a little bit, Avi. This feels like you're kind of the rabbi dandy fashion expert of our group.
It's this term that people use online where you post your outfit and talk about it to be able to show like, hey, my outfit, my fit is, perfect, it's good, this is where it's at, and then you'll be able to post about it and talk about it. And in a world where fashion has a lot more meaning than it used to, this has become part of the vocabulary of online life. Enter two rabbis, Rabbi Rafi Ellenson and Ariel Stein, with their new Instagram account called Rabbinic Fit Check. I thought it's perfect to talk about this leading up to Purim with costumes and, covering ourselves and the stories that our clothing tells. And they're doing this with rabbis out there in the world to show that there is a real spectrum of rabbis and the ways in which they dress. And they started this account to basically show that spectrum and to say, hey, this is who rabbis are. They're not a singular thing. There's not one way of being a rabbi. I think it's kind of interesting, and it's a good lens on what's going on in clothing in general, but also how it bleeds into Jewish culture, because that's, the language of the times, and that's where we're at right now.
But it sounds like a cute idea because I do rip rabbis, probably more so behind their backs, who are dressed what I deem to be inappropriately. Like I take it very, very seriously, this idea. So is part of it they're looking for advice? Am I dressed right? Kind of thing. Like you give feedback and you say you look good, you don't look good, you should try changing this up. You're too fancy, you're not fancy enough.
I think my sense of the rabbis on this specific account are the ones that are confident in the outfit that they wore and saying, hey, this is who I am.
More of a lens into them.
This is a lens into me. Exactly.
Right. Which I like too.
But what you're saying, Matthew, actually brings up something interesting. Like, what do you guys think is quote unquote appropriate wear for rabbis? How do both of you like apply that to the way in which you guys go about your days and dress and you have a relationship to clothing?
I just want to share really quickly. I walked into a guy's office to do some learning years ago, and I was dressed the way I kind of have always been dressed, which is me. I wear a lot of people can't see, but I wear a lot of button-up shirts with collars. And I often have a cardigan sweater. My style is very loosely influenced by My Zeta. I guess everybody is Zeta.
I was going to say Mr. Rogers. Okay.
When I get to work, I change my boots into comfortable shoes, and I never wear jeans. That's the other thing. I always have very comfortable Lulu pants. But I mean,
why do you never wear jeans? Is that a rabbi thing?
Nah, I just never liked the feel of it. I never found jeans that I was ever comfortable with. So I just have pants that are actually, you can't tell, but they look like dress pants, but they're actually Lululemon pants. And this is kind of the way I dress, right? And one time I went looking like this to study with a guy, and he said, "Oh, you don't look like a rabbi." This was maybe like close to 9 years ago when I just recently become a rabbi, 2017-ish. And I said, "Well, what does a rabbi look like?" And he pointed to a portrait he had of like a great-grandfather of his who was a rabbi on the wall. That when I say that, I think everybody knows exactly what that rabbi looked like, except if you met a rabbi on the street these days, maybe 1 out of 10 looks like that guy. Right? They look like us. They look much more modern, much more casual, much more of 2026. That guy looked of 1866, right? So I said, I don't want to look like that guy. And it leads into your question, Avi. It's just like, what does a rabbi look like right now?
And I think that rabbinic fit check is trying to like expand exactly that phenomenon of saying like rabbis look all different ways. And I commend that. But
is it an and or a but?
Like, I think that, I don't know, rabbis are representatives of the tradition. And I don't know, I kind of think that the generic, boring rabbi garb, it's not about the individual rabbi. It's about them representing the tradition and their sort of manifestation of the tradition. And part of why I think like, I mean, there are many, many, many reasons why I did not pursue the rabbinate initially. But I don't know. I think that growing up in Toronto, there were like expectations for rabbis. And I didn't want to be that. It came with too much baggage. So, it's 25, 30 years later, and that model has definitely changed. But I don't know, I want my rabbi to like represent Judaism, not like the latest fashions.
It can be both though, can't it?
But why are we drawing attention to the material presentation of it?
Well, what I was going to get at earlier is like sometimes I used to get into a fight with my colleague. He went for a long period of time where he stopped wearing ties on Shabbat morning. When I was 19 years old and I got my job at the Sheretz Tzedek, the very first weekend I went, I wore a nice pair of pants, I wore a nice shirt, but I didn't wear a tie. And some old guy from the back, of blessed memory, told me that was not going to fly. That I was a great Torah reader and I had a great future here, but I had to get myself, I think he said something like, get your dad to go and take you and buy you and get a suit or something like that because I was 19. And from that moment forward, and I don't love wearing ties, and I know that the tie has become a very lost art for a lot of guys. I do a wedding, the ties are in the groom, the wedding party, and me. But I would always wear a tie. Even if they told me I didn't have to, I would wear a tie. And on Saturday morning, to what you said, Yedida, I think that I think you're upholding a certain level, right? Like I think you're dressing for the office, so to speak, and I think you're dressing for the role, and I think you're dressing for Shabbat. If people feel comfortable enough to dress differently in the crowd, well, they're in the crowd, and you're the rabbi, and you're of a different standard. There are people who don't care, but the people who do care a lot. It's like you with the books. Like they care about little things like the ties. They care about, formalities and details. And the rabbi should be, especially at a shul on a Shabbat, should be upholding the highest common denominator, not the lowest common denominator. So that's why I used to give him grief about that.
I think the clothes actually do say a lot about an individual.
Yeah.
I think that for anybody that dresses a certain way and says, well, I'm rebelling, I don't want to dress like, to conform. It's very easy to point at whoever says that and to say, well, no, you're just conforming to a different standard, right? You're conforming to the skater standard or to the goth standard or to the, whatever it might be standard, hip hop, like all of these cultures have codes and have standards and have an elevated form and a casual form. And what you wear very much identifies the tribe that you belong to, so to speak. And as rabbis, we are part of a community. We are above. We are at the most elevated part of that community, but we are also part of, a certain slice of society. Now, 100%. If you're in a mainstream synagogue, you should be, as a rabbi or a cantor or any sort of clergy, wearing a suit and a tie on Shabbat as a male. With the opening of the rabbinate to women in the past decades, that has actually made a very big question mark to the notion of how a rabbi should dress. And I, for one, both welcome the diversity in the clothing and the ability for rabbis to be able to express themselves, but I also think that at some point they have to know how to dial it in. They have to know what the rules are in order to break it all the time. That being said, if you're the rabbi of a shul where literally nobody dresses like that, right? I'm thinking about in Nobody Wants This, right? The Seth Rogen rabbi.
Yeah, of course.
Right? He is dressing for his synagogue, and rabbis are doing that. And if you look across the spectrum of rabbinic fit check, you can see rabbis that are basically dressing for the people that they are ministering to. And I don't think that there's entirely something wrong with that. I think there's a little bit, because you have to know how to, I think regardless of who you are, you should be wearing a suit and a tie, for example, if you're doing a funeral. I've done funerals when literally nobody was present, where it was just me, a funeral director, and a casket. And I still wear a suit and a tie. Mm-hmm. Because you're honoring the office itself. Exactly.
I forgot a tie once before a funeral just a few months ago, and I did it without a tie, and no one said anything, but like I loathed myself for forgetting that tie and not having the time to go back. I felt like I felt naked up there doing the eulogy. I felt wrong, just wrong. It was a very dark moment, fashion moment.
But the thing that I do see, and I will say negatively, the fact is that a lot of rabbis don't know how to dress. And they're the ones that, even in mainstream congregations, they don't know the rules of how to buy a suit or how to buy a tie or how to dress as a professional woman, either with a suit and a blazer or, a top and a skirt. Like, there are so many fashion rules missing from general society that the people who are supposed to be the most elevated parts of society don't always have the tools to know how to dress.
Or maybe those rules aren't really what they once were. Maybe they're not rules like we think of them as rules.
I'll point to the fact that if you look at heads of state, they're all still wearing what we think of as the classic dress, which is suits and ties for men, suits with blazers, or, conservative dresses or tops and skirts for women. There is a code still by looking at the highest echelons of society and what they tend to wear in professional situations.
Okay, valid.
Have you ever told a rabbi to dress, maybe a friend or somebody, a colleague? Have you ever had a conversation about
the time?
Yeah.
In the nicest way possible, but all the time.
I have said to a friend that, like, you're the rabbi, you can't wear sweatpants to the supermarket, right? Like, that's the other piece. You're always on.
To the supermarket. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, hang on, though. In my life,
you're always the rabbi. You're the rabbi in the supermarket,
which is what you were talking about. Why you didn't want to do when you were in Toronto, right? Like, and it was also a big reason, part of why I didn't want to do it either, right? And I think that there's a difference sometimes that I get to enjoy having grown up here and everything like that in Winnipeg, but. You do have to be very careful, right? You do have to be very careful.
It's really hard.
Going out to the store, what you're wearing and what you're going to get caught, right? Because you might get paparazzi'd so to speak.
And it's not just what caught when you're off duty, so to speak, but you're always on duty. It's you're asking me, like, what does it mean to know what the codes are and how rabbis should dress? You were talking about suits and ties. And there's one thing that I've told many, many rabbis, right? There's only two types of people that wear ties without jackets, right? And it's waiters and bar mitzvah boys. And you don't want to be either one of those when it comes to fashion. So always wear a jacket without a tie, but never wear a tie without a jacket.
That's totally true.
But that's a rule that I think that rabbis don't always know, but I feel like they should. And sweatpants at the supermarket, yes, 100%. You can buy Lululemon pants that are just as comfortable, but that are, look a little bit better, a little more elevated. I don't think I necessarily would wear those in public because I'm very, very different than most people. I'm several standard deviations away from the average dresser. But yeah, I've told people all the time.
Maybe you should write a style guide for rabbis.
I don't think I would write a style guide, but I would want to go into rabbinical schools and have like a fashion day workshop for like, hey guys, this is how you should dress. This is what you should do and think about.
It does speak to something that I always kind of wondered about, like the yeshiva side of training for rabbis, very theoretical, very serious, but sometimes practical, real life things get missed. And it's not just a rabbi thing. When my wife was in theater school at Dalhousie, she could tell you everything about how you breathe, how you move your body, the story. Like sometimes they don't teach them how you get a job as an actor, how you actually have to handle yourself in auditions, right? Like there are practical trades elements to all of these jobs, and law school kind of found it as a, like you learn the theoretical law school, but then you actually article before they'll let you be a lawyer. You have to learn the skills. You have to learn the job. It's almost like a rabbi should have to pass, certain elements of a test, like a driving test, show up before your Beit Din, and they'll judge you based on how you dressed yourself and whether or not you get smicha.
What I will say is that there's another Instagram account. I don't think I mentioned. There's another Instagram account called Preachers and Sneakers, and it documents the world of like evangelical preachers and their like really, really high end streetwear and the $1,000 sneakers that they're often seen wearing. And it's a little bit of like poking fun at them. And you don't have that a lot in the rabbi world. The rabbis who dress very, very expensively, and I've met some of those, tend to know how to dress in a way that makes them and other certain people recognize that they have real luxury, but that doesn't scream it from the rooftops.
Interesting.
Let's move on to textual healing.
Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing. Let's get biblical. Tell me a parsha, and we'll make it physical. Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing.
Are we talking about the Parsha? Or are we talking about Purim? Like where did everybody kind of land?
It's up to you guys. It's Parshat Tetzaveh, it's Parshat Zachor, and it's also Purim coming up
before our next episode drops.
Before our next episode drops, yeah.
Well, if you want me to go first,
please go
I will
ahead.
share what I mean, Purim, just to say, I want to wish all of our listeners a wonderful Purim, and we can maybe tell Purim stories next week. Purim is by far my favorite holiday, my favorite Jewish time of the year. I'm never ready for it because I'm coming out of the winter and it always sneaks up on me. It's so awesome. Reading the Megillah, so much fun. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the word Yehudi, Jew, is first mentioned in the Megillah. In the Torah, you get Ivri, Hebrew, and you get Bnei Israel, Israelite. But there's no Jew, and there's no Jew in the prophets. It's not until they're in Persia, and maybe there's a bit of a weird origin, right? Because by then, the southern kingdom, Yehuda and Binyamin, but just Yehuda, had taken over. The northern kingdom was gone, the 10 lost tribes. And so maybe they were referring to exiles from Babylonian time as having come from Judah. But they call him Mordechai HaYehudi. And so it's the first time you ever see Yehudi. But what I also love about this word Yehudi is that its root is the same root that gives us Todah or Lehodot, to be thankful, to show gratitude, to praise. And this idea, which I know many Jews are not aware of, that baked right into this word, which has become the word to describe us since Megillat Esther and the story of Purim, has right in it these incredible connotations of thanksgiving, of gratitude. Whether we're aware of it or not, it's another thing that I believe is in and should be known for being part of Jewish DNA. So Mordechai HaYehudi, Jews, thankfulness, gratitude, that's my little textual thought for upcoming Purim. And Chag Sameach to you guys and everyone for that.
Love it. Yedida, what do you have for us?
So I'm sort of combining all of our multiple conversations today about JTS and the Ivory Tower and the Temple of Knowledge and the Parsha. So in last week's Parsha, we got all the guidelines and sort of the designs for the tabernacle in the desert and its component parts. And then in Tetzaveh this week, we get more details, especially about the garb, right? Like the uniform, as it were, for the high priest. And one of the things that we're told is that the hem of the kind of like tunic dress that the priest would wear had golden bells and pomegranates in it. And Rashi says there that this would be so that like the priest could go into the Holy of Holies and like, God would hear him and like know that he was coming. And so he wouldn't die from that encounter with the divine. But relating it also to the conversation about JTS, one of my doctoral advisors actually has a book about the Midrashim on Leviticus called Golden Bells and Pomegranates. So I went to look at the introduction and remind myself about it. This is Professor Bert Vysotsky. He talks about how there's like a shift in the first few hundred years after the destruction of the temple in sort of the rabbis' interest in the temple, that like earlier rabbinic texts are very interested in the details of how God was served in the temple. And then sort of later texts like Vayikra Rabbah and on have a different interest and they use the text differently. I'm just sort of like noting that there's a shift also in like Jewish interest and what Jews are interested in. And right, like in the earlier period after the destruction of the temple, there's this like mourning for the temple and a lot of interest in the temple. And then as we get further from that, our interests change. And I think we're in a moment of changing interests.
They decorate the Torah crowns like that too as a nod to the Kohen Gadol, so it jingle jangles when you're parading it around too, right? Someone told me that once.
It makes sense.
Same sort of thing.
I never noticed it, but I'll see it now, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I also want to talk about the Kohen Gadol's garments and how they, to me at least, they're designed to look beautiful, as you can tell by the description that they are. But there's also a lot of symbolism baked into the clothing itself. There's a lot of layers to be uncovered. You look at today's fashion, and there's a lot of things that once you know what's going on in the fashion, the Kohen Gadol has so much symbolism in there. But the one that I want to focus on is the stones on the shoulders of the Kohen Gadol, which are inscribed with the names of all of the tribes of the Israelites. And it's as if like he has the full weight of the people right on his shoulders, and he's always resting with that there, and he feels it. And to me, it's like no different than wearing, a band tee or a team jersey, right? You show that you belong. We've been talking about this in the previous, segment. We give over a part of ourselves to showing that and to remember, right, that I'm a big fan of whatever band that might be that I'm into or whatever team that I'm representing. And the Kohen Gadol is doing this, right, on so many, on the headpiece. There's so many areas where that happens. And I think that that's really fascinating. But to me, the most fascinating piece of it is that it ties into Parshat Zachor, which is this week's portion, the extra piece that we have, the maftir that we have in this week's portion, where, you're told never to forget. And the Kohen Gadol wearing the stuff on his shoulders is like similar to me to like people wearing their yellow ribbons, right? That's the names that these people have on these fasteners. And it just has that constant presence for you to be able to say, oh, I'm going to remember this. And that is part of who we are as Jews, is to remember, to never forget. And the Kohen Gadol has that in his clothes, and we should actively embrace the ways in which we create these symbols and these markers, both in our communities and on ourselves.
Good thoughts.
This has been so much fun today,
Always.
guys. Thank you for this. Everybody, happy Purim. We'll catch you after all the revelry. Thank you for listening to Not in Heaven this week. Our producer and editor is Zachary Kaufman. Michael Freeman is the executive producer. To catch every episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support our show, consider making a donation to the CJN at thecjn.ca/donate.